So we're going to be talking about the rollout of EVs and the rollout of the charging infrastructure to support those EVs, and also ensuring that that rate of rollout is appropriate to achieve the ambitions of the UK government in delivering our targets for net zero. And indeed, what government can do to support and help that, and also what can be done ensuring that the grid is ready to achieve work with that additional load. My name is Jonathan Murray. I'm the Policy and Operations Director at Zemo Partnership, and we've been working over the last 5 years with something the government set up, the EV Energy Task Force, which we ran, which was looking at how to successfully deliver that. To discuss this here today, I've got four very excellent panelists. I'm joined by Joe Beavis, who's the Deputy Head of the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, who has, not only in his current job, but previously has been involved in the rapid rollout of chargers in London, and tells me that he's passionate about sustainable transport. We have Tom Callow, who's Head of External Affairs at myenergi, and over his career, which has spanned the automotive sector, the infrastructure sector, and the energy sector, has built a wealth of knowledge of electric vehicles, infrastructure, and associated technologies. Now, I hope I pronounced this right, but forgive me if I don't. Roisin Naughton, who's the Principal Future Mobility Consultant at Arcadis, and has previously had a career working for the Transport for London, and has led many major research projects for energy transition and innovative transport modes, and is now working very much on with local authorities on infrastructure rollout. And finally, but not least, Kester Jones, Connection Strategy Manager at National Grid Electricity Distribution, who has had a career working for many of the key names in the electricity network, E.ON, Western Power Distribution, and now National Grid, and has a deep knowledge of the electricity system, the connections, strategies, and digitalisation. So welcome to you all. I want to kick off, so this is going to be a panel debate, and I want to kick off really with sort of one of those key questions, which is really about, you know, the rollout of charge points, and you know, is it fast enough? Have we got enough? Have we got the right types? Today, about 1 in 6 new cars purchased are EVs, and it's growing. In the last year, the number of EVs sold increased by about 25%. Over the same time, we saw an increase in public charge points of about 30%. And public charge points are around 43,000 at the moment, according to ZapMap. However, we all know that the major lift has actually been in charge points on private land, charging at home, or charging at depots. So we've got a real mixture here in terms of the types of charging points, and the mix of public and private charge points. I think probably it's best here to start with sort of perhaps I'd start by turning to Tom. You know, from your perspective, you've seen this from a number of different sides. What's your view on how that rollout is going? I think you're muted. While Tom's sorting it out, because we don't hear you. Oh, no, hang on. I can hear you now. No, I can't. Sorry, Tom. We can't hear you at the moment.
Let's try this instead. How's that?
Perfect.
Brilliant. Sorry about that. Apple technology not working for me. I think the main thing is that the word enough is quite dangerous in this context. So nobody, and I mean, I am not the UK's leading expert on charging infrastructure. There's other people I'm sure who are more qualified than me, but nobody I've spoken to has a view on what enough actually means. So I think that the answer is you can't really say whether we've got enough. You have to be a bit more specific than that. So, are there sufficient charge points? Are there sufficient coverage in a certain town of a specific type, that kind of thing, on motorways and so on? And then you can get into the granular detail. And it's a growing market, so you have to kind of overinvest to begin with, and then you can see about sort of strategically consolidating it. So the number of petrol stations in the UK today is about 8,000. At its height, it was well above 20,000. So we've peaked petrol stations, and now we've massively decreased them. So the same will undoubtedly happen with EV charging infrastructure. We're investing ahead of time. There's plenty out there, national level. You can always find towns or villages where there might not be enough at the moment as the market's growing. But at a national level, we've got a very sufficient infrastructure landscape, in my view, in terms of quantity. We know that because the utilisation rates are simply not incredibly high at the moment. Again, you can point to a certain motorway service area, something like that, where there might be queues on a regular basis, but largely at a national level, we have a sufficiency of number. It's more about getting into the detail then of the reliability, uptime, etc., and so on. But in terms of the quantity, I think it's about the right thing, right chargers, right places, and we need to focus on the strategic choice at the moment. So we've got to enable that fast charging infrastructure around motorways and strategic road networks, and then we can go on to do things like putting that underlying infrastructure into more rural areas as well. But we can't do it all at the same time. We've got to focus on the priority areas.
Okay, that's a really good point on where those priority areas are. Now, Joe, turning to you, I know you had experience in terms of the rollout of rapid chargers in London. Now, working with OZEV, where do you see the priority areas for OZEV, and how is that being supported by OZEV?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And I guess just to sort of echo what Tom just sort of touched on there, I don't think it's safe to say there isn't just one priority area. Obviously, there's a lot of areas that are a priority to us. Public charging, private charging are both incredibly important to us. Coming back to your original point of, is there enough charge points? I think we are starting to see that mass rollout now. So over the last month, there was another 1,000 charge points that have gone out. Previous months, we've seen 2,000 chargers. So the infrastructure is going in, and it is starting to really take off, which is obviously incredibly positive. I'm probably going to sound like a bit of a broken record today, because I'm going to be touching on sort of Levi, one of our sort of flagship programs. That is obviously a massive area of importance to us. So for those that perhaps aren't aware of it, our local electric vehicle infrastructure fund is providing over £400 million of funding to local authorities that will provide sort of a step change and a mass increase in the number of public charge points that we can get out. You might have also known that, or you might also know that we did publish our infrastructure strategy last year, which did set out where our commitments and where our priorities are. It's got 37 commitments in there, so there's quite a lot. I encourage people to read it. It is pretty lengthy though. It's over 100 pages long, so maybe one before bedtime. Being there, there's a lot of commitments. We're working our way through them at the moment. I think is sort of the key point to sort of raise there. And yeah, Levi will make a massive difference across the local authorities to just continue getting more charge points out where the local authorities need them, essentially.
Right. And that's a really good sort of starting point. And I guess with government strategies, they're always under review. We've seen OZEV's role over the last, since its inception, changing, focusing on different priorities, moving from supporting the purchase of vehicles through to supporting the infrastructure being rolled out and local authorities. Roisin, perhaps I can come to you, because that work with local authorities is one of the key areas that you've been working in. Now, I think it's fair to say that there's some really outstanding work being done by a number of local authorities around the country, but they're the exception to the rule, I think. And the challenge that's being faced by local authorities is quite large. From your experience, what are the issues that local authorities have to face, and their preparedness? How are they prepared for this revolution in terms of how we're going to use energy and the type of vehicles we're going to use?
Yeah, it's a good point, Jonathan. I would say the biggest barrier that we're seeing, well, up to date, has definitely been resourcing. There is no one specific team in a local authority called EV charge points or the EV rollout team. So that's been a real challenge. It's also the first time local authorities have had to deal with anything like this. Local authorities don't have ownership of petrol stations, or they don't manage the rollout of petrol stations. So suddenly they're being drawn into an industry that they've never been drawn into before. So it's a real steep learning curve. As I say, there's a number of people within local authorities that you need involved in the rollout of infrastructure. So you've got the highways team, you've got the electrical team, you've got the licensing team. So all of these people who work in different areas are managed by different people within local authorities are being drawn into the rollout, developing strategies. So that has been a real challenge. But as Joe just mentioned there, the Levi Fund has been a turning point in identifying that these are real issues. And actually now there is dedicated resource funding as part of the Levi funding that was announced earlier this year for local authorities to identify and recruit somebody to be that specific EV dedicated person, which is great. I do just want to link back to what Tom was saying about, is there enough charge points? And I just want to give some context for the scale of the challenge here. And again, what Joe said about the national EV infrastructure strategy, that was great to see, and it was definitely needed on a UK context to set the parameters, to set the priorities that the UK needs for this rollout. But actually, if we look at the targets set, or I don't want to call them targets, but forecasting that has been done to understand how many charge points we might need by 2030, which is obviously the key date that we will look to as that approaches with the rollout or the phase out of petrol and diesel vehicles, new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030. But that EV infrastructure strategy states that by 2030, we'll need a minimum of 300,000 charging points publicly. Again, it's debated whether that is, enough or whether it's a conservative figure to put out there. But actually, what we're seeing, and I do accept that we have hit a turning point with rollout. We are seeing much greater figures of infrastructure going in than we have ever done previously. But if you look at just 2022 as a sample, just over 8,000 charge points were delivered in 2022, and that's figures released by the DFT in January this year. So actually, if we continue at that pace, and we're not, but if we were to continue, we'd miss that deadline by 20 years. So we wouldn't reach 300,000 charge points until 2050. And actually, to get to that figure, we need to be delivering 38,000 charge points per year by 2030. So that just tells you the context of the problem here is there enough? And I do just want, again, we'll probably pick up on it, but the majority of people that have switched to electric vehicles at the moment are people that have done it because it's easy for them and it's financially viable for them. So most people have home charge points. So we are increasingly going to see, and we're seeing it in the media at Christmas time, at Easter, at summer holidays, the queues at charge points, at public charge points, at motorways, at tourist destinations that we've not seen before. And that's going to be an increasing problem as people who don't have home charge points would increasingly have a reliance on public charging infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. One thing I'd just like to get a bit of further perception from you in terms of working with local authorities is in developing their strategies, the types of infrastructure they're looking at. Now, there's a debate about slow on-street charging, rapid hubs, destination, opportunity charging. How are you seeing a pattern coming out from the work with local authorities and indeed how they work with the charge point operators?
Yeah, definitely. So, and again, looking back, it all goes back to the funding that's available. So the Levi funding, the Go Ultra Low Cities funding, that was the predecessor to that scheme, was all focused on street slow to fast charging. And again, thinking back to ownership of the roads, who manages them, where you would need slow to fast charging on residential roads outside houses that don't have driveways, they are all kind of owned by local authorities or managed at least by local authorities. So it is within their control to deliver that type of charging for those locations. In saying that, though, there are also a lot of local authorities looking at higher powered charging, but that usually needs to be off street. So again, you're a little bit limited as a local authority in terms of the land available, if you have land available. And then there's a whole other host of issues with actually what should you use that land for if it is available, and stacking up the financial case for it across internal stakeholders that it should be used for EV charging. If you win that case, then you can start to look at high-powered charging in off-street locations, but generally you wouldn't see rapid charging on-street and residential locations. I know Joe and I worked together at TfL, and there was a big scheme of rolling out rapid charge points in strategic locations on the strategic road network in London, and obviously that makes a lot more sense where you have authority to do so and the traffic demand to back that case up.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you raised there, sort of that looking at land and accessing the land and being able to plan it. And that, I think, then comes down to a key issue that we face with the grid. Kester, perhaps I can come to you now, because you know that classic issue that I've heard time and time again is that, you know, somebody identifies the perfect location for putting charge points, whether it's a fleet, whether it's a service station, or whether it is a rapid hub, and then they have that conversation with the distribution network operator, and suddenly all kinds of issues around the headroom and the capacity of the grid in that locality come up. Tell us about, you know, what's happening with the network, and how can the network distribution operators work with charge point operators and local authorities in terms of helping identify where the low hanging fruit.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me onto the panel today. So, Kester Jones, I'm Head of Connections for National Grid Electricity Distribution. It's a real good question, and there's a lot of kind of focus about connections to both the distribution and transmission networks at this moment in time. In the last regulatory year, so we're a regulated business, regulated by Ofgem. In the last regulatory year, so 2022 to 2023, we actually made, across our 4 licence areas in National Grid Electricity Distribution, over 37,000 connections, brand new connections to the distribution network. And on top of that, we also processed over 30,000 domestic low carbon technology, so domestic EV charger applications as well. So we are connecting people, and we are connecting things like EV chargers to the network on a real regular basis. There's a few things that kind of bring into that and play into that. So Ofgem launched what they call their Access Significant Code Review. That became live on the 1st of April of this year. Essentially, that changes the way that we as distribution network operators charge out the connection to the network. So previously, if somebody wanted a connection to the network and that involved the extension assets, so the cable between the person connecting to the network and the network, they'd be charged for that element, and also any reinforcement and any upgrades to the network. From the 1st of April to this year, the reinforcement, the upgrade element of the network is now funded by the distribution network operator through the relevant price control. So the only element that the customer has to pay for is the extension asset, so the element that connects them to the electricity network.
And I think that's a real game changer, isn't it? Because, you know, previously that marginal cost of the connection was all falling on the last connection point. So that is a game changer in terms of helping to socialise some of those upfront costs for some of these connections.
Yes, I think it will be. It will certainly make, or logic will dictate that it will make projects that weren't viable or were less viable prior to it going live more viable to a customer going forward. So if you did have a project where you received the quotation prior to the 1st of April of this year and it wasn't viable, by all means reapply to us, because it may be now with the reinforcement elements being socialised that project now becomes viable. I think the second part of answering the question as well is, please come and talk to us early on in your planning. Please don't leave it until you've got planning permission granted and you've almost got everything stood up on site before you come and talk to us about connection into the distribution network. What we can, what we do time and time again, and we do this through a lot of interaction with local authorities and customers throughout, we run what we call connection surgeries. So they are free surgeries where you can come and talk to us about connections into the distribution network. They are normally before we issue a formal quotation, and we can give you some guidance about the electrical capacity that you're looking for and where in the area it may or may not be at more or less cost. So before you start putting in formal applications and really fixing down planning permission and standing up sites, please come and talk to us, because what we find is that customers and sites can normally be quite flexible in the early stages of their thinking. And the earlier you involve us as distribution network operators through the connection surgeries, the more we can get involved. We can give you a red, amber and green status as to where the electrical capacity is with regards to your potential list of sites. And we can really look to kind of enhance your planning. But please come and talk to us early stages.
That's a great message. Yeah, a lesson for everybody who's looking at connections takeaways to talk to the DNO at an early stage. I'm aware that the electricity network and the operation of the network is changing. And we're seeing, along with sort of a smart grid starting to develop, and the role of the DNO changing to a system operator rather than a network operator. It reflects a change in the challenge that your organisation faces. But at the same time, we're seeing electric vehicles being rolled out, putting a load on the network. We're seeing electrification of heat coming, perhaps a bit slower, but it's coming, putting an extra load. How is this going to impact on the grid's capability? And what investment? What efforts are being put there to reinforce the grid, or is it about using the grid smartly?
I think it's both. It's a combination of both. So within National Grid Electricity Distribution, we have a distribution system operator that operates as its own kind of directorate, reported into the president. They're really looking at the future energy scenarios and forecasting volumes of connections of EV chargers and all other connections from a demand perspective and generation perspective, and when they are likely to hit. So we try and forecast as best as possible the picture that's likely to hit and the capacity that's likely to be required. What we've historically done then is gone to look to reinforce the grid and physically build bigger wires, build bigger pylons, install bigger cables to cope with that. But what we've seen from historic usage is we've done that really to cope with peaks at certain time of the day or certain time of the year. And that isn't an efficient way to run a network. So what we do now is we employ a flexibility first approach. So we've got contracts with organisations that may turn up their generation at certain times of the day or year, or may turn down the demand at certain times of the day or year, so that we can actually reinforce this, but actually use the network as a smart network to still provide the capacity to customers and organisations that require it.
That's great. Now I want to flip that round and come to Tom. I just noticed, Tom, that he had an extra point to make about is there enough questions? So I'll allow you to respond to that. But then I'd like you to sort of focus on, that smart grid and using a smart grid needs us as users to be smart. So how can we do that, and how does that fit into the charging, the home? Over to you.
Yeah, I'll get that first. I mean, I think our view at myenergi is that consumers are quite keen, actually, or will be quite keen to kind of establish effectively their own smart grid in their own home, basically. We've seen that to some extent with people automating their own homes. There are lots more, smart doorbells, Google Homes, Amazon Alexa, whatever the other providers are, etc. people are trying to kind of knit their homes together and make their lives more sort of convenient as a result, or more automated. And we're trying to do the same with home energy management, so that actually, you know, energy goes from being this kind of, you know, annoyance where you get the bill and you think, another energy bill, to actually you're taking more of a role in the energy system, providing energy and flexibility back to the grid, and actually being more interested and engaged in how you're managing it and monitoring it in your own home. So that's what we're trying to do, and I think consumers are quite happy to do that, and we'll be happy to do that. One area where, though, we are keen to avoid, if you like, overcomplicating it, is that you can get to the point where a consumer is having to do too much thinking or have too much intervention to actually achieve this goal of kind of, you know, relying more on renewable energy in their own home and solar generation, maybe if they've got that down the grid. So we've got sort of a very advanced, our data team in our business working on algorithms that will help automate our devices to tie in with solar data, you know, local solar generation patterns and predictions. So we've got a solar predictor in our business, and also energy tariff data as well. So your sort of half-hourly tariff data that you get 24 hours in advance if you're some customers on a smart tariff. You know, not having to make people go, oh, here's my next 24 hours, you know, cost on my energy bill. I'm going to go manually change all my EV charging setups and stuff like that. We don't want people to have to do that in the coming years. We want it all to be smooth and automated. So automating it, making people less reliant on fossil fuels, but also giving people time back in their day and not having to have to kind of manually intervene. So that's key for us. The thing I was going to say about is there enough capacity on EV charging? It's kind of linked to the grid, which is that the debate is always around charge point numbers, and what we need to flip it to is a debate about charge point capacity and the total capacity in the network. In the same way that we talk about the electricity grid in terms of network capacity, you don't often hear the number of substations there are in the UK. We talk about the overall capacity of the grid. And if you an exercise I did sort of beginning of 2022, so it's about a year and a bit out of date now. I'm going to double the number of utilisation very, very conservatively to make the numbers
Tom,
look better,
just go back
or look more
about 30 seconds, because we lost you. I think it's
so
the
sorry.
start of a really critical sentence.
No, it's fine. So about start of 2022, I did an exercise looking at the UK's public charging network in terms of capacity. So not the number of charge points, what the theoretical capacity was if you took all the power every second of the day, multiplied it number of hours a day, etc. Annually, if you add up the annual capacity of the network, the theoretical, this is not usable, let me just caveat that, the theoretical capacity, this was beginning of 2022, is about 4 billion kilowatt hours per year of capacity. That's theoretical. If you're really conservative and say, look, there's going to be times a day when it's low, cars don't charge at exactly the high speeds they should do, etc. Let's assume that 25% of that is usable, right? So let's assume 1 billion out of that is actually usable. The number we were at the start of 2022 was around about 150 million kilowatt hours per year out of 1 billion. So let's double that and now say we're at 300 million kilowatt hours per year of public charging being used. That means we've still got the majority of that usable headroom, right? So in terms of the number, we need to start thinking about capacity. That's my point on the capacity point. We've got bottlenecks in some localized places, but in terms of that overall net capacity, in the same way that Kester and others don't want to overinvest in network capacity at a local level, we don't actually want to invest we don't want to build 1 million public charge points when we actually need 100,000, because we'll have spent a lot of money we don't need to spend.
Okay, it's a really good point. And we've just had a question come up in the chat, which I'd like to return to, and takes us in a slightly different direction. And it's about public car parks. And effectively, we've got a question from Michael Cunningham, and it's reflecting the fact that a lot of owners of existing car parks are looking to provide more parking and looking to install EV charge points and looking at it as a revenue income. As a lot of these are speculative, will there come a time when DNO network capacity will be more easily and accurately available for initial feasibility being advised by private consultants? So Kester, can I come to you first on that, and then Roisin, I'd like to come to you about how that's relating to what's being conversations that are going on with local authorities. So Kester.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. yes, through an innovation project called Open Data, there's a number of capacity maps that are already available on the National Grid Electricity Distribution website. So if you navigate to our website and navigate to, I think it's the Open Data section, you'll find a selection of capacity maps there. Some are generation, some are constraint maps, but there is a specific one as well that's called electric vehicle capacity map as well. And if you navigate to a local distribution substation, it will give you a red, amber, green status on capacity available at that local distribution level. We're always looking to improve. We're always looking to make the data that we share more accurate and refresh it on a more regular basis. And one of the other elements that we're looking to do as well is we're looking to digitalise the connections process. So what do I mean by digitalise the connections process? Essentially, we're looking to move some of the offers and services where at the moment you have to apply and it goes to a planner who then does a network study and issues a quotation. We're looking to move that online. So you can now apply online on our website to connect a domestic EV charger and you'll get a response real time, 24 hours a day. Similarly, we've also got a provision whereby you can request a budget quotation for a connection into our low voltage network and you'll get a response online. We're looking to enhance that, so later this year you'll be able to get a firm quotation online. And earlier this month we launched what we called our connections portal, our customer portal, so you can actually go online now and actually track an inquiry progress through. So we're always looking to enhance that digitalisation of connections journey so that customers can either go and find the information themselves so that they can run their own kind of speculative optioneering developments through, or they can actually go online, because we also understand that not everybody fits into a profile of 8 till 5 office hours Monday to Friday.
Yeah, excellent. So that's really helpful, and it's great to see that process of engaging is becoming easier. There's tools there to make it faster. So that really helps. Okay, Roisin, if I can come to you, sort of, I think that opens up a question about car park and how we use space and what space is out there. I recently had a conversation with the British Parking Association, who represent basically everybody's got any car park in the country, from the sound of it. The real estate must be huge. But something they posed to me was that if we had solar charging on that estate, they estimate it could provide the equivalent of a Hinkley Point in terms of generation. So there's one question about that, you know, that using that charging as a revenue, using that charging to feed back into the grid, but also utilizing the space as well as we can. So is that thinking coming into local authorities, and are they, you know, actively working with the car parking owners in their areas?
Yeah, it's a good point, a really good point. And I'd say my experience so far is that there's been a real divide between private sector delivery and public sector delivery. There's no or limited talking happening between both of them, because it's really difficult for authority to know what people's plans are. I can remember when we were at TfL developing the London's 2030 strategy, we'd have to scour stakeholders' websites for commitments to how many charge points they'll deliver. You know, at Aldi's, at Tesco's, at the big kind of trip attractors or destination places, to see actually how will that feed into the forecasts that local authorities are developing on how many charge points they will need. So absolutely, I would say if you are planning as a car park operator, as a private installer, speak to your local authority, speak to your regional body to say, you know, what your plans are, where you're looking to deliver those, because it's really helpful. And as you say, it reduces the amount of public money that needs to be spent on delivering charge points if a private sector authority is planning on delivering them nearby. It is a good revenue, potentially a good revenue stream. So there's a real stark difference between slow to fast and rapid in terms of the revenue that you can make. So rapid is much more commercially viable and the revenue potential is greater. So that's why we're seeing private sector kind of go on and deliver that with very limited government interjection or government funding, because it is a viable delivery model. So that's kind of the reason why we're seeing local authorities focus on slow to fast, because it's much less viable. And it's been identified as somewhere that needs funding to deliver that support, because it is needed, but it obviously is just less viable because of the amount of users that you get to use a slow to fast charge point. So a slow charge point, you're looking at 12, 13 hours at anything up to 7 kilowatts. So that's one person getting to use that overnight. So your turnover with a rapid is obviously much greater than that. So your revenue stream is equally stronger. So yeah, I think my point would just be to speak to local authorities, regional authorities about your plans, let them know what you're thinking. And then also on the kind of smart charge point side, it's really good to see now that as part of the UK strategy, that smart charging will look to be mandated in public charge points as well. So again, trying to influence that behaviour to encourage people to charge at off-peak times, even on public charge points. So we're not talking about domestic electricity tariffs, we're looking at public charge points as well. So encouraging people through pricing to shift their behaviour so that they can turn up at their Tesco's or, you know, wherever at 9 p.m. at night and charge for a little while it's cheaper to do so and reduces that pressure on the grid.
Great, thank you very much. Joe, I think I'm letting you off lightly so far, so I'm going to come and put the spotlight on you. One of the things that Roisin made a very good point there about the commercial viability, the return on investment from different types of charge points and the role for the public sector in intervening. Yeah, in terms of OZEV's strategy, where do you see the focus of activity coming from OZEV? And a sort of a complement to that is, how do we make the most of the charge points that we get out there, especially those that are funded with public funding?
Yeah, so and it kind of comes back to what I sort of said at the start. So we're putting a lot of effort out, or into the model. We're putting a lot of effort out there for all different types of charges. I don't think there's a priority area. With the local authority sort of strategies, yes, we did publish our infrastructure strategy, but we haven't, and where we have sort of put what people take as a target, but what we predicted and what we've estimated as needing by 2030, we haven't gone into that granular level of detail because it's just incredibly difficult for us to understand a national scale where charges are needed. We're leaving that to the local authorities. At the end of the day, they're the experts of their own areas. They're the ones that are able to say and sort of identify where the charges are needed, if that is in a car park, if that's on the street, if that is supporting their residents with off-street parking and whatnot. In terms of getting the most out of the charges, yeah, I think there's a very long way to go. I think Tom touched on it right at the start. Utilisation isn't quite there at the moment, but I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just shows that people are willing to invest at the moment. We've seen some of the a lot of companies coming out, sort of committing to investing huge amounts of money. So it's not just the government that is investing in this, it's the private sector as well. Tom will be able to say that himself in terms of the private sector. Obviously, Levi will go a very long way with helping that, and then further down the line, sort of touching on our Project Rapid or Rapid Charging Fund, which is due to sort of go public later this year and start opening up. That will start to help the motorway service stations and areas like that as well.
Okay, I mean, a question on sort of like, perhaps I can just pose to you and then perhaps pose to Tom, is around. There's a perception out there, I think, that, you know, you think of an EV, you think of a car. There's a lot of vans, increasingly a lot of vans, and vans that go home with drivers, vans that go to depots. How do we get the access to the charging infrastructure? How do we make that as open as possible?
Yeah. So I guess
First thoughts to you, and then I'll come to Tom. Yeah.
Well, it's very sort of ambiguous area, isn't it, vans? Because you've got all different types of users to vans, but let's, for the purpose of this, let's call it fleets and fleet users. Where
Oh,
there we go.
no, you're back again.
I'm back. I'm not sure what happened there.
Bit blurry, but you're back.
Blurry. For the purpose of this, let's say fleets, in terms of van users, it is an area of sort of increasing importance. We're working with the industry, but I guess just almost a call for evidence. If people do have any sort of thoughts or opinions on it, we're all ears on that one. It's an area of the market that we're perhaps not as familiar with historically. And like I say, we're always open to hearing people's thoughts and ideas on how the market can be best supported in that sense. Okay, great.
So Tom, so coming to you, how do we deal with vans? How do we? I've seen examples where a van's been trying to charge at a parking spot that's been obviously
it's too small, or so I'll start with an anecdote from a big fleet operator in the UK actually, who said at an event I was at so about a year ago, if we can charge our vehicles on our sites and our customers and our sites and our employees' homes rather than your public charging network, because I was then a public charging company, they said we will. Not because we don't think you're any good, but the point is we will de-risk our charging. So as soon as you get, and it's like fueling, you actually see far fewer during the day. You probably see far fewer kind of commercial vans on a petrol station than you do, let's say, first thing in the morning or in the evening, because they're probably filling up their their diesel van on the way to a job, on the way back from a job or day's work, and they don't really want to go and fill up with fuel during the day because that's their working time when they want to be productive in their vehicle or on the job their vehicle's taking them to. So the same will be true of electric vans, really. So they probably won't want to spend even minutes charging during the day. They'll probably want minimum downtime during the day. So that means, well, how can we get them charged the beginning and the end of the day as efficiently as possible? And a lot of it does come down, as you say, Jonathan, to either depot charging, which is getting better. The changes on connection costs are really going to improve depot charging infrastructure costs, for example. But also, and the feedback we always had in my previous role in public charging was that a lot of van drivers do park on the street. They over-index on street parking versus driveway parking. Some of that, by the way, is because they typically park the van on the street and they might have a driveway with a car on it that doesn't fit a van. But they park on the street and they want to charge the van on the street, which they currently can't do unless there is a public charger there. Now, one of the areas we're very keen on looking at is basically taking a slug of people who have always been thought of as totally out of scope for home charging, right? So the people who can't park off street have always been considered out of scope for home charging. That's been the sort of the usual way of thinking about it. And it's probably a good, good sort of 8 million plus households out there. If you assume that there's a load of flats in there that you can't park right outside of a flat, usually it's the ground floor, the number of sort of, if you like, terraced homes or semi-detached homes or whatever that have on-street parking only is in the millions. And actually, there is a way in our view to put those people into scope of home charging potentially, which is a kind of what we call a through street charging solution. So there are a number of companies now who are genuinely rolling this stuff out at a reasonable scale. We're talking kind of dozens of installations at the moment, but as soon as they scale up to hundreds or thousands of installations, we're hoping that more local authorities will they basically start thinking of it as like a drop curb. If you want a drop curb, I guarantee in any part of the country, you go on your local council website, search drop curbs, and there'll be a web page dedicated to how to get a drop curb in your local area, standardized cost, standardized process. It'll take you a few weeks. If you go on and say, I'd like a charging channel to charge my car from a home charger, most local authorities will look at you like you just spoke a foreign language and say, I don't know what you mean. But some have now set up dedicated pages for that to allow it. And they're realizing it's a lot lower risk for them than actually taking on a 10, 20-year contract with a CPO or something like that, because they actually pass over the operation effectively to a home charger, a home charging customer. And all they're doing is effectively making sure there's a good quality, standardized and safe installation of a channel. It's then obviously the customer's responsibility to use that appropriately. But we're not talking about kind of gullies that people can trip into and fall over. We're talking about safe stuff with self-closing lids. When it's installed, and I was at an installation last week in Milton Keynes, a lady actually came past as we were looking at this installation and said, what are you guys chatting about? And we said, we're chatting about this charging channel here. And said, I didn't even know that was there. it's so discreet. She lived down the road, 4 doors down. She didn't know it was there. So this is the kind of thing we need to roll out more, these innovative solutions that will help people, particularly like van drivers, but anyone who parks on the street, to be able to get that full charge overnight. And actually that will sort them out for the day.
Great. Well, look, we're coming now to the end of our session. And we've gone into a huge area that we've covered and a lot of detail. One of the things that when you get into the detail, and there's a lot of intelligent brains working on these issues, come up with innovative solutions, it can sound daunting. So stepping back from the detail, I'd like to sort of close on very briefly for each of you, the perspectives of, are we on track to delivering our net zero transport ambitions, or will electrification and the rollout of charge points be able to deliver its fair share, or are we going to need to go look at other alternatives as well? So quick one-liner round the table, and I'll come to Joe last, as he's got the biggest shoulders and responsibility for delivering this, as his organisation came up with the target or the ambition. But Tom, what's your perspective?
In terms of different propulsion types, right? I mean, I think, so my view is, I'm not an absolutist in that I don't necessarily think battery electric will be possible for all forms of road transport, and I think we need to be open-minded. But I think the debate for passenger vehicles and vans is settled. It will be battery electric for almost all of them. Okay.
Kester, is the grid going to be able to cope with the increase in demand that's going to help deliver this ambition?
Yes, it will. As long as we're able to build out within the regulatory regime, and as long as we can understand what it is that customers want and the impact on the network, so we can look to try and reinforce that network ahead of need.
Excellent. So positive endorsement. Roisin, perhaps from your perspective, local authorities have to look at a number of different challenges for transport. From your perspective, will local authorities be stepping up and helping to deliver this in the timeframe that we need it to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as you say, we're already seeing that in a lot of places, and the government, not to steal Joe's thunder, but they're really supporting local authorities. They're listening to what they need and enabling them with the tools that they need to go and deliver those. But I would say as well, the focus isn't just on electrification. We can't just electrify everything or alternative fuels. The focus also has to be on mode shift. So we have to look at more sustainable modes of travel. We can't just shift everyone from a car to another car. They can be traveling better journeys. They can be sharing journeys in cars. So I think that should be a core focus as well.
Brilliant. And Joe, coming to you finally. The focus for OZEV is now on local authorities. Where do you see that moving to? And equally, some of the positive comments that we've had, maybe you and your colleagues at OZEV are going to be out of a job soon, if you're successful.
Just before I come to that, I think what Roisin, she beat me to it annoyingly, which was, I think mode shift to behaviour change is massive. I hope I'm not doing myself out of a job or discrediting our work, but active travel and bits and pieces like that is where we collectively need to head to. But obviously, as the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, we are promoting the use of electric vehicles when vehicles are needed. In terms of sort of where we're headed, I think there's a very long way to go, and I'm not sure we'll do ourselves out of a job. I think there's a lot of work still to be done. I don't think we're quite there. I think that, like I say, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of priorities. We're not going to be able to solve it overnight. I think we'll keep chipping away at it, and as I say, we're always open to thoughts and opinions. So if anyone would like to reach out, please do.
Brilliant. So I think the overwhelming message coming out of this is the ambition is huge. We are making real progress and on track. Electric vehicles are not going to be the only solution, but they are a really practical solution that's being rolled out en masse, along with the charging infrastructure to support that. I'd like to thank our panelists here today, Joe Beavis, Tom Callow, Roisin Naughton, Kester Jones. Thank you so much for contributing to what's been, I think, a really stimulating debate.